Hello there, and welcome to episode 1 of Software Explained Simply. This is a series I'm doing where I'm going to explain some of the basic programming concepts starting from the very beginning. So if you've never written a single line of code, you know nothing about programming, you're in the right spot. We're going to take it right from the beginning and build our way up, and I'm going to provide a roadmap for you to follow. And I'm going to explain some things, and then with each episode, I'm going to give you some homework and some practice on your own to get you introduced to programming. There are a lot of really great resources out there, so I don't want to duplicate those. I can just point you to them and maybe explain some of the parts that I think are not explained as well, and kind of give you more of like the big picture context of what all these things are. So today we are talking about web pages. I think if you're going to become a developer, you should first start with the web. If you want to do apps or build robots or anything else technology related, you need to know how to use the web. Everything is internet connected, and knowing the web will help you with anything else you do. So today we're talking about web pages, and we're talking about three things. We're going to talk about what they are or how they work, what technologies they use, and then I'm going to show you some examples of that. So starting out, a web page is really like a document. So if you request google.com in your browser through the magic of DNS, which if you don't know what DNS is, maybe you should at some point read an article or two. You don't have to know in extreme depth, but just know basically when I request a URL, there's a process that eventually gets me to the person that owns that content. So if I want google.com, I eventually reach Google's servers, and then they send back to me the Google homepage, which my browser shows for me. And this homepage is really just a document, just like you would think of like a Word document or Google Drive, Google Docs type thing. It's just a document. And there's kind of more to that, but if you compare like websites from now to websites that were, just when the internet was starting out, my favorite example is the Space Jam website, but these websites, when the internet was very young, were really almost quite literally just documents. I mean, you could click these little, planets right here, and there were links to new pages, but you would get a page, you'd click something else, and it'd send you another page, and there was no interactivity. There was nothing like we have today. Like if you think about Twitter, where you have an account and you can you submit data, you can like things, you can retweet things, it saves your preferences. There's a lot of interactivity that has evolved over the web because it's a great user experience, and our technology has gotten better over time, so it allows us to do more of that kind of stuff. So how is a web page structured? You might have heard the term HTML before, and HTML is the structure of a web page. It tells you what is on the page. And the basic structure is there's an HTML tag, and an HTML tag is formed by this caret at the front, then whatever the tag name is, and then finally this caret at the end. And so this would be the opening tag, this would be the closing tag. And then everything inside of that would be the children or the descendants of this parent tag. So in the simplest page structure you could get, you have an HTML tag, and then you have a head, which is where you include resources, and you have a body tag. Oops. You have a body, and this is where the actual elements of the page go. Now, there's a lot of different HTML tags, but just to kind of give you an idea of what some of them are, we have the HTML tag itself, which is the top level tag. It says, hey, of all the resources on the internet, an image, a GIF, a file, this is an HTML page. We have the head where the resources are, and then we have the body, which is where the elements go. Inside of the body, you might find things like a paragraph, an anchor or a link tag, images, text fields, buttons, and then this one that's called a div, which is really a way to group or divide tags from each other. And you'll see examples of a div popping up a lot of places. Okay, so let's do a quick demo, and let me switch over. So on the left here, I've got this program called Sublime Text, spelled like this. It's just a text editor. So if you have not chosen a text editor, Sublime is a good one to start with. There's also one called Atom that's pretty much, they're about the same. So if you don't have one, pick one and start using it. Okay, so over here I'm just going to have the browser open, and I have this file called test.html. And because I've saved it as HTML, Sublime will auto-fill these tags for me. But here we see again our basic web page structure. We have, well, we don't want 4 tab size, we want 2. Sorry. So we have the head, and then we have the body. And just real simply, let's just put something in the body. So let's say, hey, how's it going? If I save this and then open this over here in the browser, you can see here's my HTML file. So I have this p tag, and it says, hey, how's it going? So here's my web page, as simple and not interesting as it is. And if you right click and click inspect, you can pull up this thing called the developer console. And here we can see the actual markup that we were sent, and we can see that it matches. We have our p tag, and it matches what's over here on the right. Just to kind of do some other examples, there are h tags, stands for headings. So you can do h1 through 6, and they're meant to be like the heading on a page or the top title of an article. So if I say here's the heading, close it up, we'll see that we have this heading, which the browser has default styling for how it does everything. So here's what a heading looks like by default. It's larger, it's bolder. We can do the same thing with an H2, which would be not quite as big. And then just kind of for fun, we'll put a link in there. And a link or anchor tag takes an href, which is where you want to send it. So I can say, point this to Google. And so if I refresh this, now I have this link that if I click it, eventually it takes me to Google. Okay, so there's our basic HTML page. Nothing fancy, just showing it here locally in our browser. So we did it. We made a web page. It's not exciting, and it doesn't look like this, right? I mean, there's not a lot going on here. It's not very pretty to look at. It doesn't do anything. So we have some things on the page. The next step would be to make them start looking a little better and looking more like what we want. And so we do that through what is called CSS, which is our second technology or language, if you want to call it that. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and HTML determines the structure of the page and what is on it, and CSS determines how things are displayed. So they're affecting things like the size, the color, the font, and the position. And then down here I have 3 examples of CSS attributes. So that would be the color. We could set it to red. We could set the font size to 16. We could set the width of the thing to 100%. And we can do a quick demo on that to see how that might work. So the simplest way to apply styling to something is inside of the elements. I'm going to use this style attribute. And so in here I can say color is red. And so if I refresh this, it changes my heading red. You know, if we want to, I don't know, let's make our paragraph, you know, really big. So let's say it's 100 pixels for the font size on our paragraph. Now this is really big. If we wanted our link to not have this little underline, we could say that our text decoration is none. And so it takes off the underline right here. So that's the simplest way to apply style. You can also do it using a style block in the head. So we talked about how the body is for the elements of the page. The head is for the resources. So if I make this style block, I can use what's called a selector to determine what I'm applying this style to. So if I say H1 and then put these curly braces, anything I put in here will affect all of the H1s on the page. So for example, if let's do color blue. Now our heading is turned blue. And so this is a very generic selector. We're just using the element itself. Now there's a couple other ways we can do this, and as you progress in your journey, you'll learn why you would use one of these versus something else. And so the first thing we can use is what's called an ID. And an ID is like an ID sounds. It's something that identifies the element, and there's only one ID of the same kind on each page. So if I call this, I'm going to call it the greeting. So there can be only one ID of greeting on this page. So then up here in my style block, I can select that element by using the pound sign and then the ID. So here, again, I could set the font size to something crazy. So it applies it. The third way you can do this is you can apply what's called a class. And a class is meant to be reused. So if, let's say you had a bunch of links in here, you can't give them all an ID that's the same. So you can't say ID of link, because you can only have one ID per page. So you can't do this, or at least you're not supposed to do this. What we can do is apply a class. So we can say that the class of this is link. And then we'll make this text a little different just so we can make sure we're seeing the difference. So I say all these are links. And then up in the style block, I can say dot link. A class is represented by the dot at the beginning of the selector. And so here I can say, before I apply any styling, let's just go ahead and refresh this. So here we see 3 links, and they all have the underline. So I could say if I want all of my links to not have that underline, I just don't like how it looks, I can say text decoration, none, and they all go away. And then if I I want the underline on this final one, I can take away the class, and then the underline is applied again. Okay, so a quick selector review. The easiest way, and there are some preferences among developers of which one of these you should use, but for now, just learn them all, and eventually you'll discover which one is best to use at what time. So the easiest way is just put a style block right on the element itself. So right on the H1, we said the color is red. The next thing you can do is put the style inside of a style block. So here I'm affecting every H1 on the page by saying that the color is red using an H1 selector. Next thing you can do is use an ID. There's only one ID per page, but if you had one specific thing you wanted to target, you could give it an ID and select it that way. And then finally, we talked about classes, and classes are used a lot more, and it's really saying all these things are the same, or they behave the same way, so I want them all to be applied the same way. So I'm going to give everything that I want to look this way the same class, and then instead of writing, let's say I had 3 of these right here, I can, instead of putting a style block on all these and saying style equals colors equal red, and doing that 3 times, I can instead just apply the same class, and then I only have to write my CSS rule 1 time. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. Our web page is styled. We're still not quite this here on the right, but we're closer, if only slightly. Okay, so talking about interactivity. Now we know that on the web, we don't have these boring websites that are just links that you click around. We can do a lot of stuff on the web. And the way this is done is by using JavaScript. JavaScript allows us to do things dynamically, and it happens in the browser as opposed to asking for a new page when we click a link. So to kind of show you how this works, let's go back to Chrome. And here we're on the home page. Now, if I click one of these links, it takes me to a new page. So if I click About up here, reloads, I get a new page. If I click the home page again, if I go back to the home page, I see this refresh that happens. And this is because I'm going to a new page and the server is rendering it, known as server-side rendering, and sending it to my browser. Now, we're all familiar, don't look at my autocompletes. We're all familiar with autofill or autocorrect. So, pizza places near me. Now, the page isn't reloading when I'm doing this, right? Like, you don't see it blink, I'm not changing where I'm going, but things are happening. Like, it's alive and it's interactive. And this is using JavaScript. So when I type in this, we can actually see what's happening behind the scenes. So if I go to the network tab in the inspector and I watch for requests that are being made, as I type in here, so if I say pizza is near me in Oklahoma, as I type, you can see with every letter I hit, there's a search being made over here. And if we look at the results of one of these, if I can grab there it is. We can see the result, or we can see what the autocomplete is doing. So here the options are in Oklahoma City and near me in Oklahoma City. Okay. And so JavaScript is making a request. The request is coming back in the background, and then it updates the content dynamically. Now we'll talk more about JavaScript later, but for right now, I just want you to be aware that there's server-side rendering, which is visiting pages and having the server build the entire document and send it to you. And then there's client-side rendering, where JavaScript is doing things in the background and then updating the content live. Now, JavaScript is a language that's probably more what you think about when you think of a conventional programming language, in that you can do math in it, you can type strings of stuff, and it puts them together and does stuff like that. And so we'll go into more detail about JavaScript later, but for now, I feel like that's a good introduction just to kind of get you thinking about the different ways that we do things on the web. Okay, so one more thing I want to mention before we wrap up. You're going to be learning a lot of new things, and you're going to have questions, and things aren't going to work. It'll be confusing. And as we know, like if you have a problem, you can Google it and usually find the answer. And with programming, that is definitely true. Everything that has ever been asked programming-wise has been answered somewhere on the web. And it's generally pretty easy to find, especially when you're dealing with the fundamentals. So a little tip when you Google stuff. You want to be as succinct as possible and use good keywords. So let's take, for example, let's say that I didn't know how to change the text size of my text. So first I would think, okay, which programming thing am I dealing with? So I'm changing how something is being displayed. So that's CSS. So I'll start with that, CSS, and then I'll just try and describe as simply as I can what I'm doing. So CSS, change text size. And then if we just go to the first link, we will find the answer somewhere in here, if it will load. Okay. So we are on the CSS fonts page. Scroll down through here, we have font style, font size. Okay, that sounds pretty good. So the font size property sets the size of the text. So pretty simple. A couple examples right here. Seems good. Now, there's a very popular programming website called Stack Overflow. And this is just a question and answer site where everybody has asked every programming question ever, and people answer it very easily, and they, vote up or down the answers based on how good they are. And you will become very, very familiar with this site if you are not already. But one word of warning, you can get a lot of great answers from here, but it's also important to understand why they work and how they work. Just by copying this, you may complete whatever you're doing right now, but you're not going to learn and you won't progress. So yeah, copy stuff from here, like crazy and learn from here. But do make sure that you're doing the learning part as well. Okay, so quick review. HTML is the structure of the page, and it uses tags to create elements like our paragraph tag. CSS styles the elements and changes how they're displayed. So we change the color to be red. And JavaScript makes our web pages more interactive. And JavaScript has been around almost since the beginning of the web, but recently there's been a lot of code and frameworks developed that help us to kind of wrangle some of the, I don't want to say problems, some of the things that are not so nice about JavaScript. And so as a result, our web pages have become much more interactive, much more user-friendly. So it's a good thing, and it's here to stay. Okay, so homework. Now I've hopefully explained some things that you didn't know, and you've learned a couple things. So now it's time to put it in practice and see what you can do. So first thing would be to pick a text editor if you don't have one already. I mentioned Sublime Text and Atom, and those are both great choices. So if you don't have one, just pick one of those and call it good. They're pretty much the same. And then read and complete the following tutorials. These are from the Mozilla Foundation. They're the maker of Firefox, and they're also just kind of general web champions. So here's a tutorial on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then after you play around with that or you get bored, make your own web page. Make something about yourself, put images and GIFs and all kinds of stuff in there, and play around with it. I mean, you're going to learn the most when you're having fun and not just following tutorials blindly. If you don't like these tutorials, just use those Google skills and Google an HTML or CSS tutorial and, do whatever you want. Okay, I think that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. Let me know below what you think, or maybe a topic that you want me to cover, and I will see you next time. And also put the links to all this kind of stuff in the description. Thanks.